Welcome back. I hope most of you are already back here in the course. And the first questions, of course, did you have any questions? Did any questions come up during the break? Do you have any problems with running the app? No. Okay, so then let's continue. Welcome back to the third part of this lesson. And we have created a very simple web API before we got into the break, but we stopped with this error. The system told us when inserting a game which is assigned to a certain genre, so we want to create the genre and the game in one run, that we get a possible object cycle. What does possible object cycle mean? Well, if we take a look at our modal, and then we zoom out a little bit, and then we see, let me draw a little bit here. We see that the game genre has a list of game. So game genre has a reference to our game. But if we take a look at game here, it has also a reference to the game genre. You see that one? So this is why we have a loop. Because the following is the case in our situation here. We have game genre referencing game and game referencing game genre. And if it gets an object, it will try to serialize in JSON the game, which includes the game genre, which includes the game, which includes the game genre. And that is an endless loop, an endless iteration, and it will never stop. That is a problem. If you have something like this, the simplest way of getting rid of that problem is to break the cycle by ignoring the list that is in the lookup table. So just go to genre, to list of games, and add JSON ignore on top of it. But please make sure it should be JSON ignore, not from Newtonsoft JSON. It should be JSON ignore from system text JSON. That's important. Please use JSON ignore from system text JSON. We are not using Newtonsoft JSON here. We are using system text JSON, the new thing. Okay? JSON ignore should be written on top of the list of game in the genre. And that breaks the cycle. Because now we have game with a relation to the genre, you see it up here, but we have no longer a reference back from game genre to games because this is ignored when turning into JSON. Let's try it again. Let's run the video game manager. Let's go back into Postman. Try to insert Prince of Persia as a jump and run again. And this time, everything is fine. We get Prince of Persia. I tried it multiple times. This time, this is why the ID is rather high. With the genre, new genre, jump and run, personal rating, everything is good. Now we can insert the game and the genre in one run. So please try that and remember JSON ignore. You will definitely need that during your homework too. Let me know if you have any problems or if you have any questions. Otherwise, I will wait a few more moments until everybody could catch up and add the JSON ignore attribute. It seems that we don't have any open questions or problems, so we can add the last thing to our controller before we move on and build a small little Angular client. What I want to add as our last example, I want to add a method with which we can get a single game using its ID. So I would like to implement again an HTTP GET because I want to read data. Public. This time I will not return a list of games, but I will return a single game. Get game by ID. This is the name of the method that I would like to do. Then I just specify int ID, because that is the ID that I want to look up. Well, and the implementation is trivial. Context.games.first or default. If it can't find the ID, it will return simply null. Game goes to game.id equals ID. That's just a link query, which we have practiced over the course of the last weeks over and over and over again. It's as simple as that. But one important thing is missing. Where does the ID come from? And this is where we need to add another route. Let me write it down, and I'm pretty sure you will immediately understand it. I'm just writing ID here. So what the system will now do, it will combine the route up here with the route down here, so that when we add API/games/any kind of number, it will parse out this number and give this number to us using the parameter of the method. It's much easier to understand if I just show it. Let me run this code. API games gives me a list of games, that's fine. And now if I want to read summer games, I just have to say /1, and this will give me exactly one record, the summer games. So this one here, this parameter was parsed out into the route. This is why I was using this route here. This was part of the parameter. And it is given to me through the parameter here, and then I can use it inside of my implementation. I will leave that on the screen, give you a chance to catch up or ask any questions that you might have. Nice, very nice. So you see, building a basic web API is really, really simple. Because if you just recap in your mind what we had to do, we spent a lot of time discussing the different steps. But if you recap really what we had to do, it was a file new project, create the modal classes, create the database context, register the database context in the configure services method, and then you could immediately go on and implement the controller. That's it. That's all we have to do, and we have a basic web API in just a few lines of code. That's the beauty of ASP.NET Core. It's really a very nice and simple framework for building small APIs. Good, very good. Now, what I would like to do next is I would like to implement a very simple Angular application where we can access our API and display a list of games. Does that make sense? I hope it does. So let's do that. So now, please inhale, exhale, free your mind. We will switch to a different programming language. We will switch to a different framework, Angular and TypeScript. And now we want to combine the front-end world of Angular. You have learned about that in this course too, not by me. But you have learned about it, and we want to combine Angular as a front-end technology with ASP.NET Core as a back-end technology through the web API. This is what we are going to do. So please open the folder where your video game manager is in. Here I have my folder with the video game manager, and I will create side by side to the video game manager, so not as a sub folder, but directly to the side. I will say create a new Angular application, and this new Angular application, ng-new, will be called Video Game Manager UI. I assume that you have all installed the Angular CLI from the other lessons that you have this year. If you don't, let me know. I can recap quickly how you install it. ng-new Video Game Manager UI. Press enter. How to install it? Okay, absolutely no problem. npm install -g like global @angular/CLI. If you don't even have npm, then you need to install Node.js. You did that when creating Angular applications. npm install -g @angular/CLI. This is not an Angular course, don't get me wrong. I'm just trying to bring together things that you already learned in the Angular part of the course with things that I teach you, ASP.NET Core. So we will simply add a very, very simple and very basic Angular app. Ah, you are already there. Okay, so now I will do it again. Do you want to enforce stricter type checking? If it were a real project, you always should say yes on this question. If you just do some experiments, say no. Would you like to add Angular routing? No, we will keep things simple. Which style sheet format would we like to use? CSS, the default selection. We want to keep things simple. And then you have to wait for a few moments because the system created the necessary files for you. But now it needs to fetch the packages from npm. It needs to download Angular APIs from the internet. I'm using here the latest and greatest version of Angular, Angular 11. If it looks a little bit differently on your side because you might use Angular 9 or 10 or whatever, for this example, it doesn't matter at all. Okay, for me it is done. Maybe it will take a little bit longer on your side, but in the meanwhile, I will just fire up Visual Studio Code inside of the folder where my Angular application lives. And with that, I will wait a few more moments so that everybody can catch up. I will go through the Angular code rather quickly, okay? Because this is not, as I said, an Angular course. If you don't understand what I'm going to write in a few more moments in Angular, then you should recap what you did in the Angular part of this course, okay? If you can remember it a little bit, just copy my code, it will work, okay? We will not dive into the details of Angular. Does anybody need support in creating the Angular app? Have you heard about StackBlitz? Do you know what StackBlitz is? Okay, it has nothing to do with this example, just to show you a tool which I like to use if I'm on a computer with a rather slow network connection. It's just for your interest, okay? It's just to bridge just to fill the time that we are waiting. Let me show you what StackBlitz can do. If I go to stackblitz.com, I can say I would like to build an Angular app. You see, click, and if you do that, you wait for approximately, I would say 10 to 15 seconds, and you are done. That's it. Isn't that nice? You have on the left-hand side all the files. You have in the middle Visual Studio Code. Yes, this is the Monaco editor from Visual Studio Code. And on the right-hand side, you immediately see the output of your app. So if I change something, hello, whatever, hello, super genius Angular, whatever. And if I wait a second, I immediately see it on the right-hand side. So if you just need to quickly create an Angular app as a kind of proof of concept or something like this, StackBlitz is really, really, really fast. It's super fast. And you can save it. And if you did that, you can always click share. And you can even share the ready-made application. So you can give this URL to a friend or a customer, and they can use it and they can run your Angular application. You do not even need to install a web server or publish in a cloud provider or whatever. It just works. It's really nice. However, the editor experience of Visual Studio Code here in the middle is not as good as the real Angular in the real Visual Studio Code. So this is nice for small experiments. This is nice for proof of concepts. But if you do serious development, you should probably not use StackBlitz. But for instance, in our Coder Dojo, in the Programming Club for Kids, we regularly use StackBlitz to build small convenience browser games. So building a small, we are currently with the 10-year-olds or 9-year-olds, we are currently building a Christmas Yeti game, a jump and run, where we run through a winter Christmas landscape with a nicely animated comic figure. We do that in StackBlitz because most of the kids don't have Visual Studio Code installed. So maybe this is useful for you, and you do not absolutely need to run Angular. If you want to try out React or Vue or build a static website or anything like that, you can definitely check out StackBlitz for that. I really like it and I use it regularly. What do you think? Does that look interesting? Yep, it is. Does anybody need additional time waiting for downloading Angular, or did we fill the remaining time properly with StackBlitz? Everybody done? Like that. Okay, so let's run this application. Maybe you can remember how you run an Angular application. All you need to do is you need to open the terminal, ideally directly here in Visual Studio Code. You can also have an external terminal wherever you want. And you just, by the way, you open the terminal using View Terminal or shortcut Ctrl-Ö. And here you run npm start. That's all. npm start. Do we want to share usage with Google? Yes, of course. Send everything to Google, whatever. I typically share those things with the providers of these open source platforms because they can do some interesting statistics about who uses what, and that's it. Yeah, and that's it. Once it runs, I can fire up my browser. It's here. And I can say localhost 4200, and I will see a nice little welcome screen from Angular. Good. I will wait for another moment so that everybody can catch up. As I told you, the only thing that you have to write is npm start in a console and it should run. Make sure that you are in the correct folder. You have to be in the folder where your application resides. Probably. If you have that problem, let me give you you know what? Let's try StackBlitz. For those of you who already have their application running locally, it's fine. You can stay with Visual Studio Code. For those of you who have problems in getting this to run, let's give StackBlitz a try because it's so easy and so fast. Go to stackblitz.com and click on Angular. Let's just try it. I didn't plan for that, but hey, why not? We are doing live coding here, so why not using StackBlitz? Just fire up a new Angular app with StackBlitz. It should be done within a few seconds. StackBlitz works best with the latest version of Chrome browser. So if you have a choice, please don't use something like Opera or so on. Use Chrome if you have it. If you don't have Chrome, try the latest version of Edge. If you don't have Edge, try the latest version of Firefox. If you have nothing like that, you can give it a try. I have no idea if StackBlitz works with a browser like Opera. So I don't know. Okay, now everybody should have either a locally running Angular app or an Angular app in StackBlitz. So now let's access our locally running web API, and we will do that directly here in StackBlitz. Okay. So, please go to appmodule.ts. Appmodule.ts. It's in the source app folder. Appmodule.ts. And there we say import HTTP client module from @angular/common/HTTP, lower, lowercase, something like this. Import HTTP client module from Angular Common HTTP. This gives us access to the HTTP client module, which we will then in line 10 import HTTP client module. So please change these two things. Add this import statement, and here in the imports down there, you need to add it here. You have done that in Angular, right? You have accessed any kind of API in the backend. Good. Then this is just a repetition. Nice. Please interrupt me if I'm too fast. If I don't hear an interruption, I will continue now. Good. Let's go to appcomponent.html. And here we will just say header 1, let's say something like, I don't know. If you are in, by the way, if you are in Visual Studio Code, your app component HTML will contain a lot of stuff. You can remove everything. Just Ctrl-A, delete. Okay? We don't need any of the generated stuff. Let's add a header 1 and let's say video games. Okay. I would like to display a table with a t-head, table header, with a table row, ID, name. Not very beautiful, but it's okay. And then we have a t-body with a table row, which will be repeated. Here we need to add some code later with a td, foo, and a td bar. So you see, we have a nice little table here on the right-hand side. You see it, it's not very beautiful, but hey, that's it. We are not going to focus on styling and CSS and adding some fancy graphics. It's just a static table, nothing special. I will keep it here on the screen so that you can follow along and type in this code. It's just HTML, nothing with Angular, nothing interesting here yet. Nice. So let's go into our app component TS. In order to process the results that we get from the server, we need to translate our modal, this is the modal, this one. We need to translate that into TypeScript interfaces. And I would like to show you a trick. I'm not sure if that works here. I can't show you the trick here in StackBlitz. I have to demonstrate this trick in Visual Studio Code. Please take a look at my screen. You do not need to follow along because it's very easy to type in that code. There are various tools which are called C# to TypeScript, something like this. C# to TypeScript, you see that one? You can install this one. Then you can just go to your Visual Studio Code, copy your classes into the clipboard. Then you go in Visual Studio Code back, open the TypeScript file here, and then you can hit F1 and say C# to, where is it, TypeScript, paste as, and guess what? You have the C# classes converted to TypeScript. Isn't that cool? Oh yes, it is. Yes, it is. I really love that because it saves you a lot of typing. In practice, in real world programming, there are more elaborate functionalities to turn Visual C# into TypeScript. But for such small projects, this is really, really useful. So again, if you would like to do that, you can use this plugin here. It works for the small samples that we do, C# to TypeScript. And if you have that, you can go to Visual Studio, copy the C# code, go to TypeScript, press F1, C# to TypeScript paste as, and then you will get the interfaces. And I will copy them to my StackBlitz project. If you can't install the plugin because something isn't working, please type in these few lines of code. It should be done within a minute or so. Did you know that tool already? We only have to write a few more lines of code, maybe 10, 15 lines of code, and then our example will be finished. We will recap, and I will show you the homework, and you can spend the rest of the morning until this morning's lessons are over, already dealing with your homework. Okay, good. So let's give it a try. In the app component class here, we will define a property, public games, and it will be a game array. And we will immediately create an empty array, just as a default value. By default, the games are empty. Next, we will define a method which is called ngOnInit. This is typically the method that you would like to use if you read data from a web API. It's a very good place where you can add initialization code. And when you add ngOnInit, it's a best practice that you also add the onInit interface, which you have to import from Angular Core. So this is what you should add. OnInit up here, OnInit down here, and ngOnInit down here. And I messed up TypeScript and C#. Of course it should say implements. I used C# syntax in TypeScript. I'm very sorry. If I mix up programming languages, that happens all the time. Okay, then this is something new. It's a best practice. Maybe it was kept simple in your Angular course, but as soon as you load data when your component starts, you should add this code in the ngOnInit method. By the way, just to make sure that you understand it, in exams here in this course, I will never ask you to create an Angular app. Okay, it might happen it will happen during homeworks because it is important for me that you understand how these technologies work together. But for exams, Angular is not relevant. That's important. Okay, so let's add our web API. So what we will do is we will say this dot, I forgot something. We need to add the constructor. Constructor private client HTTP client. This is what you have to do. And you can use the light bulb here to import HTTP client from Angular Common HTTP. Private client, that's constructor injection. I guess you talked about that in your Angular course. It works exactly the same as in ASP.NET Core. Well, not exactly, but nearly. So we get the HTTP client. And now we can write the code. This dot client dot get. Where can we find our API? HTTPS localhost 5001/API/games. And I think we use single quotes here. Again, mix up of C# and TypeScript. And let's store the result in the games. Subscribe, result, goes to this.games equals result. To make types work, we will tell it that we get back game array. Game array, not games. So this is the code that you have to type in. I guess you can understand it from the context. You already wrote very similar code in your Angular course, I'm pretty sure. I will zoom up a little bit so you see the import statements too. So what we added is we added here this. We added the constructor and we added the import statement here. Now we have the games here in this array. So we can switch to HTML again and add the necessary code here. I hope you can remember how this worked. ng4 equals to, of course, star ng4 equals to let game of games. This games here refers to this games here. Okay, so this is, oops, sorry. This is just a loop over all the games. Let game of games. And then we can say here, display game.id. And here we can say game.name. That's the data binding. ng4 gives us a structural directive which repeats the table row for all games in the variable games. And then we refer with an interpolation to the ID and the name. It might be a few weeks ago when you last wrote some Angular code, but I hope it starts coming back, how this works. Let's try it. In Visual Studio Code, you can just open the browser. In StackBlitz, I will click this button here, open in new window. That will give me a new window, and it will tell me, property ID does not exist on type game. Let's see. Why? Ah, my God. You see, the generated TypeScript code has a mistake in it. It has an uppercase D. So please change that. Lowercase d. So the C# to TypeScript converter wasn't perfect in our situation. So I have to manually adjust the D here. Let's try it again. No output. That's not good. Let's go into the developer tools and let's take a look what's going on. You see, what we get is an error because it couldn't load the games. Of course it couldn't load the games. We have to start our C# project first. If there is no web server, nobody can answer. So let's run our web API in Visual Studio. Now the web API runs. Now let's go to our Angular app and reload. It will still not work. Boom. We get a different error. And this one is an error you will frequently stumble upon when working with Angular and web APIs. And the root cause for the error is course. Have you heard about course? Do you know what course is? It stands for cross-origin resource sharing. Let me know if you have heard about it. If not, I will describe it. Okay, I'm not sure if I fully believe you. Maybe you've heard about it, but you might have forgotten it. No problem, we will discuss it. You see, our Angular app runs on blah 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 stackblitz.io. For some of you, it will run on localhost 4200. So this is a certain endpoint. But our API runs on localhost 5001. So the location of the API and the location of the user interface in Angular is different. They come from a different server. One comes from StackBlitz or port 4200, and the other one comes from localhost 5001. And there is a security mechanism built in modern browsers, which is called CORS. CORS means that a web API must explicitly opt in. It must say it is okay if I get accessed by somebody who doesn't live on the same server that I do. So by default, an ASP.NET Core Web API only allows browsers to call itself when the browser application also comes from the same host, localhost 5001. If it doesn't, we need to enable CORS. Okay? And that enabling of CORS has to be done in ASP.NET Core. So we stop the ASP.NET Core thing, go to Startup, and here we have to write our last 3 or 4 lines of code for today. Please go into startup.cs. Startup.cs. And there you look for the configure services method. And somewhere in this configure services method, the exact location doesn't matter. You can put it at the front, at the beginning, at the end, in the middle, wherever you have place. You say services dot add course options dot add default policy builder. I know it's a somewhat long line. Builder dot allow any origin dot, let's put that in the next line, allow any method dot allow any header. So in our case, we simply allow everything. In the real world, of course, it's not a good idea to allow everything. You should specify the URLs. Maybe you should specify the methods or headers. But for this course, for our examples, for our experiments, that's perfectly fine. So maybe it's a good idea if you type in this statement and if you stick to this example, because for the homework, you will definitely need something like this. By the way, the homework contains a link to the documentation where you can read all the details about course. For now, you should now understand what course is. UI and API run on different locations, on different hosts. And if you have that, you need to allow course. And in ASP.NET, the easiest way to do that is that. This adds course. And the last line of code, I promised you, 3 or 4 lines of code. This was 2 lines of code. The last line of code is in the configure method, because the add methods up here, they only add the helper classes to dependency injection. We talked about dependency injection before. The thing that we need to add here is we need to add course to this water pipe. You can remember what I told you? HTTP requests flow in and they flow through this pipe of middlewares. And here we need to say app.useCourse. And that's it. These are the 3 lines of code that we need to use. 1, 2, and 3. Use course. Let's try it. Run it. API comes up. Go to StackBlitz. Reload the app. Yoo-hoo! This was what I was aiming for. Now we have an end-to-end example using Angular as our UI, doing an HTTP GET request to our web API, the web API using Entity Framework to access a SQL Server database. And if after this lesson you recap what we did in code, it will be surprisingly few lines of code that you have to write to build a system like that. So for simple apps with simple databases, simple APIs, and a rather simple UI, writing the code isn't difficult. It is really not difficult. Once you understand how these things play together, it should be a matter of minutes until you have something running. And we will practice it over the next weeks, over and over and over again. So don't worry. If it is a lot today, we have enough time to practice. So let me know who needs support, who has problems, or who needs additional time. Mit dem wünsche ich euch nur einen schönen verbleibenden Vormittag, einen schönen Tag und wir hören uns nächste Woche. Außer es gibt dazwischen Fragen, dann meldet sich einfach, okay? Sehr gut, alles klar, schönen Vormittag noch, pfiat euch!